Um, Joe Manchin is full of shit, and we're going to talk about how full of shit he is. Um, and so with Joe Manchin, he claims that he killed the Build Back Better deal because he believed that it was going to cause inflation and that the poor people were going to go out and buy drugs, which poor people can't afford to buy drugs. If you really look at the market, though, drugs are like anywhere between $20 to up to $1,000, depending on what kind of grams and pounds you want. So, of course, these poor people couldn't afford it anyway, even if they wanted to. But here's why that's not true on what he's saying. Joe Manchin had torpedoed Biden's legislative agenda, but as a person but Michael Klein, who's an economist, says that Joe Manchin's inflation concerns are misguided. One of Senator Joe Manchin's main concerns is deciding to pull his support for the current President Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, is that it would drive up inflation, which is currently rising at the fastest pace in over 40 years. On December 19th, the West Virginia Closet Republican said in an interview that he couldn't support the bill in its current form because of the impact he says it would have on increasing consumer prices and the national debt. The decision effectively killed one of Biden's top economic priorities. The Senate had been considering roughly $2 trillion of a bill that would have been passed by the House, and that money would have been spent on healthcare, education, fighting climate change, and much else over the next decade. But the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he still plans to bring it to the floor for a vote. And the Closet Republican Manchin and other Republicans have argued that the risk that more spending could push inflation even higher is too great. As Michael Klein, who's an economist, says, he believes that Manchin's concerns are misguided, and here's why. Now, we're going to put the $2 trillion into context here. High inflation is clearly a problem at the moment, as the Federal Reserve's December 15th decision to accelerate its withdrawal of economic stimulus signal says. The most recent statistics show inflation, as measured by the annual increase in the Consumer Price Index, was 6.8% back in November of this year, and this is the highest level since 1982, yet it's still a long way from the double-digit inflation that was experienced back then. The question then is, could an additional larger spending increase cause inflation to accelerate even further? And to answer this, it's useful to put the numbers in the context here. The price tag of the Build Back Better plan that was passed by the House of Representatives is about $2 trillion, and it's to be spent over a 10-year period. If the spending is spread out evenly, that would amount to about $200 billion a year. It's only about 3% of how much the government planned to spend back in 2021. Another comparison is the gross domestic product, which is the value of all goods and services provided in the country. U.S. GDP is projected to be about $22.3 trillion in 2022, and this means that the first year of the bill spending would be about 0.8% of the GDP growth. And while that doesn't sound like a lot, it's not significant either. Goldman Sachs has estimated that U.S. economic growth is on pace for 3.8% in 2022, if the increased spending translated into economic activity on a dollar-for-dollar basis, and that could lift growth over one fifth. Now, but what really matters here is how much the bill would spend in excess of any taxes that's raised to pay for the program. Now, the higher taxes on the wealthy and corporations that the House version of the bill calls for would reduce economic activity. Taking money out of the economy and offsetting some of the impact of the spending would stimulate it. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that the bill would increase the deficit by $150.7 billion over a decade, or about $15 billion a year. Again, assuming that this is spread evenly over 10 years, it would amount to less than 1/10 of the 1% of the GDP. Even if elements of the bill are front-loaded, it does not seem that this increases the government debt would contribute much to inflation. In other words, the proposed spending would make a barely noticeable macroeconomic effect, even if it had unusually disproportionate impact on the economy. But it won't reduce inflation either. Some proponents of the bill, including the White House and some economists, have gone even further on this. They have argued that the proposed spending package would actually reduce inflation by increasing the productive capacity of the economy, or its maximum potential output. And this seems implausible to me, at least given the current level of inflation. Historical evidence shows a more productive economy can grow more quickly with relatively little upward pressure on prices, and that's what's happened in the U.S. since in the 1990s. And when the economy grew strongly with little inflation, it takes time for investments like those in the bill to translate into gains in productivity and economic growth, meaning many of these impacts will be slow to materialize. Current inflation is likely an acute problem, reflecting the supply chain disruptions and pent-up demand, challenges that won't be resolved by expanding the economy's productive capacity 5 or more years down the road. At the same time, what's in the bill would make a big difference to improving the lives of the average Americans by providing more of them with affordable child care and health care and reducing child poverty, areas where the U.S. seriously lags behind in the, when it's compared to other rich states or rich countries and everything like that. And it would help the U.S. fight the ever-worsening effects of climate change. And while the $2 trillion in spending would be unlikely to worsen inflation if it were to become law, I believe it could do a lot more to materially address these challenges that America's lacking in. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King, and also hit the notification bell so you can be notified when a new video comes out. And thanks for listening.